Rabbi Sachs. Welcome to the Chai Academy, broadcasted, being broadcasted live from the Chai Center. So we are smack dab in the middle of a Holocaust series course, and each class is independent. And if you would like to see previous classes, you may go to thechaicenter.com/academy and you can catch up. You don't have to catch up. As I said, each class is self-contained. Um, we the last time we met, we spoke about Anne Frank, and that was even though it was a terrible story, it's at least a lighter subject. Today we're going to be talking about the um, the Judenrat, or the Judenrat, plural, and Kapos. Very different types of people. So basically, the way it worked was throughout Europe, wherever the Nazis conquered the countries and the cities, etc., and the towns, they appointed Jews. They appointed Jews to be their liaison, right? A liaison to the Jewish community. Now, right? So they're a conquering force, right? They want to, they want to make sure they have a connection. But the problem was that these Judenrat or Judenrat singular, unfortunately, it became a terrible thing. It became just an absolute horror. So whenever the Nazis came with a decree that we would like to deport from the ghetto or from the city or from the town, we want to deport 250 Jews leaving tomorrow. They told that to the Judenrat, and the Judenrat then sent out messages, and if people did not come, they sent out the Jewish police task force. And I mean, look, they rationalized that if they didn't do it, then they rationalized that this is what this is what they had to do. So the way it worked was they sent to the Miller family. Please report tomorrow at 10 o'clock at the town square. The Miller family did not report at 10 o'clock. They sent the police. That was the Jewish police. That's considered you disobeyed the governor for all purposes, the Jewish governor, which answered to the Nazis, and they dragged them. They dragged them out of the house, and they deported them. Some knew that deportation meant death, as we'll discuss. Some didn't know that deportation meant death. One of the most famous, most troubling Judenrats was a fellow by the name of Rudolf Kastner. So Rudolf Kastner, he was a Judenrat in Hungary, and he actually he answered to Adolf Eichmann, who was the architect of the final solution. He didn't speak to an underling. Rudolf Kastner spoke directly to Adolf Eichmann. He knew, Rudolf Kastner, and it's proven, Rudolf Kastner knew that deportation meant death. However, he never breathed a word. He didn't tell anybody that deportation meant death. In return for his silence, this tragic figure, Rudolf Kastner, so in return for his silence, Adolf Eichmann gave a pass, allowed him and his family to leave this occupied territory, and also with money, Rudolf Kastner was able to save 1,600 people of his choosing. Right, so it's 1,600. So he saved his family and 1,600, friends of his, and also prominent figures. One of the people he saved was actually the Satmar Rebbe, right? Rabbi Yoel Teitelbaum. Rabbi Yoel Teitelbaum came to the United States, and he settled first in the Lower East Side, and then Williamsburg, and the Satmar Hasidim are huge. So he saved the Satmar Rebbe. One time, I don't know if he was introduced or someone spoke to the Satmar Rebbe, and they said about Rudolf Kastner that Rudolf Kastner saved you. The Satmar Rebbe became angry and said, Rudolf Kastner saved nobody. God saved me. So he was a very troubling figure, this Rudolf Kastner. And so once again, he saved his friends and families. Macy's has that friends and family discount. So he saved his friends and families, and he also saved prominent people who he felt he should save. It was left up to his discretion. And that's probably the most troubling part of this. Anyway, Rudolf Kastner came to Israel, and he was actually in Ben-Gurion's cabinet. In the 1950s, Rudolf Kastner was accused by an Hungarian Jew of him being a collaborator, him being a Judenrat, that he collaborated with the Nazis, and his silence brought death. Now, Kastner made an incredible error. This accusation would have gone nowhere, except Kastner sued this Holocaust survivor, this Hungarian Holocaust survivor, for libel, and it went to court. Kastner lost. Kastner lost in court, and he was exposed as a rat, a Judenrat. He was exposed as a person that was selective, who survived Hungary, and who didn't, in Budapest, and who didn't survive, and he lost. And when he was exposed, short time later, he was assassinated by Jews, by Holocaust survivors, Hungarian Holocaust survivors, in a street in Tel Aviv. There's an excellent yet very troubling book, probably on the top 10 books that I've ever read. It's called Perfidy, and it's by Ben Hecht. I believe it's banned in England. I don't know if it's banned in Israel, but you can get it in the United States. Perfidy by Ben Hecht. And he exposes Rudolf Kastner. He just exposes them as this terrible individual. He exposes Ben Gurion. It's a nasty book. It's a nasty book, but all documented, and that's what makes it even the more troubling. So if Kastner would not have sued for libel, Kastner could have gone his merry way. But the fact that he sued and it went to court, and you can read, by the way, in this book, it had copies of the court documents. It's extremely troubling, extremely troubling. Now, there is a historian, a Holocaust historian by the name of Yehuda Bayer, or Bauer. So Yehuda Bayer Bauer, right? He wrote a book, and he said that history judges Rudolf Kastner too harsh. The fact that he was silent, he said, didn't make a difference, because there were plenty of people who yelled from the rooftops that this was going to happen and this was going to happen. People didn't listen. People didn't believe. So Kastner did the best he could under the situation, and Cho's family, you can't blame him. Chose dignitaries, leaders, people who can grow Hungary Jewry when the war is over. That, he said, so that's how you have to view Kastner. When you read the book Perfidy by Ben Hecht, you see Kastner just as a slime ball, and it's unfortunate. There was Judenrats in every single city, wherever the Nazis occupied, and they placed people in charge of the ghettos. Now, there's a famous story of a fellow by the name of Judenrat. He was the leader of that particular city. It was the Vilna ghetto, to be precise. His name was Jacob Gens, Gens, I believe. And what he did was he made the decision Whenever they said we need 100 Jews, we need 50 Jews, we need 30 Jews, we need 200 Jews, so he always rounded up by his private Jewish police force that worked for him chronically ill people, and he justified it. He said, "Look, if I don't round up the chronically ill, they're going to go after the women and children. So let me at least." Round up the chronically ill, people who have a short lifespan. There was an uproar in Vilna during the war. In the Vilna ghetto, there was an uproar, and people shouting. And he said, "Look, I feel I'm doing right by Vilna, by the Jews of Vilna. If you don't feel I'm doing right, then set up a court of law, but it has to be a Jewish court of law. It can't be, any Nuremberg trials." He says, "I have to be judged by my own people. And if I'm guilty, I'm guilty." He was actually executed by the Nazis in September of 1943 in the Vilna ghetto. It never went to trial. He never survived the war. And for all the good he did, for all the help he gave the Nazis in Vilna as being the Judenrat, he was killed for his work. There's an interesting story about the Warsaw Ghetto, which we will talk about the Warsaw Ghetto shortly, not today, in another class, because that Warsaw Ghetto is a high point. So his name was Adam Chezinakow, and he cooperated. He said, "Okay, you want me to round up how many? Sure, officer. Sure, Nazi. Sure, bastard. Yes, absolutely." Once he became aware that deportation meant death, he committed suicide. The minute he became aware, he realized what he'd done, that he'd cooperated with the Nazis, and he sent people to their certain death. He killed himself. Now, these Judenrats were in a terrible predicament, because some of them were told that each police officer that works from the Judenrat has to bring 5 people to the town square by Tuesday at noon. And they were warned by the Nazis that if a police officer does not bring 5, then that's okay. We'll take his family members in their stead. So the tremendous ethical dilemma that people had then was terrible. There was a story about a Judenrat who he was told to give a list of 100 Jews that the Germans and Jews and addresses that the Nazis will go to on the Judenrat's discretion. He wrote 100 times. He gave them a list, his name, and his address, and he was prominently killed because that was considered disrespect. As far as judging them, most of them anyway. I'm not talking about the Kastners of the world, but just judging them. They were they evil? They probably shouldn't have done it, because if they did not round up the Jews, it would have slowed down the German machine, right? If the Germans themselves had to round up, right, as opposed to having, maybe it would have slowed down. But I don't believe they were evil. I just think they were tragic figures, they cooperated. They cooperated, which is a terrible thing to cooperate with a Nazi, but it would have happened anyway. But maybe, perhaps, perchance, it would have slowed them down. It's hard to know. So that's the Judenrats. The Kapos, they were a different cloth. So the Kapos were, for the most part, non-Jewish. Who were the Kapos? The Kapos were the police in the concentration camps. Now, if you were a Jew who was a Kapo, the worst insult, by the way, you can tell a Jew, even now, Kapo. right? It's a terrible. It was terrible. These kapos basically was the Nazis gave an order and they did it. They were cruel. They did it. They were treated better. They had more food. More food meant life. So instead of a chicken soup and a thin a watered down chicken soup and a potato, they were given a piece of chicken in the chicken soup. But they did their job. They did with job with glee. Most of them weren't Jewish. Some of them were, and those that were despised by their fellow Jewish inmates. Kapos were known to beat Jews. So it wasn't only the Nazis that were beating, the Kapos were beating, because they wanted to find favor in the Nazis' eyes and live another day. There was a famous story, I can't forget this, the famous story of a capo. His name was Schneeweiss. And this fellow, he was in Janowsk, something like that. I forget where he was, but I think it's Janowske, something like that. Maybe somebody on knows and can make a comment. So he was cruel, and he hated religious Jews. He was very secular, and he used to mock religion, and he was cruel. And he used to shout and scream and hit, etc. But there's one story where it was in Yom Kippur, and the Nazis were known for this. On Yom Kippur, so the Jews had nothing to eat, right? Watered down chicken soup, tasted like hot water, a tinge of a flavor, and a potato, and maybe a slice of bread. So these as Yom Kippur, the Nazis. The only time the Nazis gave proper food was Yom Kippur, right? And they did it because they wanted to break the morale of the Jew. So they came over with these plates of meat and vegetables. And they came over to Schneeweiss, and they said, "Here, give this to your people." And Schneeweiss says they're not going to eat it. It's Yom Kippur. So they said to Schneeweiss, "Give it to them to eat." He said they're not going to eat it. It's Yom Kippur. So the Germans started to get irritated. And the Germans said to him, Fress, you eat. He said, no, it's Yom Kippur. Schneeweiss was gunned down. He was shot to death at that very moment. And when a Hasidic Rebbe heard the story, the Hasidic Rebbe says, now I understand what it means when it says in the Mishnah that even a bad Jew is full of mitzvahs like a pomegranate. He says, because Schneeweiss ultimately died in the holiest way. He died as a holy martyr because he would not eat on Yom Kippur, even though he mocked Jews and Jewry and religion and ritual, etc., etc. So, as opposed to the Judenrats, the Kapos were bad. Kapos were very bad. The Kapos were, first of all, by the way, Kapos, they didn't have to live cramped in the bunk with the commoners, with the lice and it's 4 people to a bed. The Kapos had their own barracks. And everybody had their own bed, or everybody had their own bed and locker and chair. So the Kapos lived a much better life. But you basically had to accept the job of being a Kapo. And once again, they were particularly cruel. There's a very famous quote from Eli Wiesel. And it goes something like this. Eli Wiesel said, there were German Kapos. There were Czech Kapos. There were Hungarian Kapos. There was Slovakian. There was Georgian, right, from which is part of the Soviet Union, not Atlanta, Georgia. There were Uzbeks. There was French. There was Lithuanian Kapos. For that matter, there were Christians. There were Jews. There were atheists. And he says there were professors, there were industrialists, there were artists, there were workers, there were mechanics, there were militants, there were Marxists, there were humanists, and there was your basic criminal. He says, Eli Wiesel said as follows, however, not one rabbi. That career, the rabbinical career, did not offer up one capo. Right? Did not offer up one rabbi to be a capo. So he brought that out because capo is the lowest of the low. So why you could have a professor that stooped to that level, he says you never had a rabbi that stooped to that level. And so not one rabbi. So capos were less than tragic. They were cruel. They were evil, as opposed to the Judenrat. Just most of them were just trying to do their best, and they justified it. And by the way, there's during the camps, during the deportations, most of them the camps, but even the camps, there were so many ethical dilemmas. Right? If the Germans wanted 100 people, and they were asked this, the sages, the halachas, the rabbis, they were asked questions in Jewish law. Rabbi, they want a member from my family. If a member from my family does not show, then 2 people die. What do I do? What do I do? And the rabbis basically used to cry. What answer can you give to that ethical dilemma? Other than shed a tear, right? There was nothing much more you could do. But there were so many ethical dilemmas. By the way, one ethical dilemma that has really, which wasn't really an ethical dilemma. I don't know if you've ever heard the story, and I believe it's called, the book is by Eli Wiesel, or it's called Sunflower, I believe, is that there was this Nazi who was on his deathbed. And Eli Wiesel, he asked for someone to speak to him. Eli Wiesel came, and Eli Wiesel stood there, and the Nazi says, I want to ask forgiveness for what I've done. I regret it, and it's not who I am. And before I die, I want to make peace with my Maker. So the story goes, Eli Wiesel looked at him and said, I personally, maybe I could forgive you. I'm not sure. But I definitely cannot give you penance for the 6 million Jews that died. And with that, he turned his back on this fellow and he left. And there's a whole book about it. Did he do the right thing or wrong thing? He's a guy on a deathbed. And Eli Wiesel was he heartless or was he right? So we should never be faced. We should never be faced with these dilemmas, ethical dilemmas. Bila hamovas lanetzach. May death be eradicated forever, and may we talk about happy things. Warsaw Ghetto, that was triumph. Sad triumph, but a triumph. God bless. Any questions? Rabbi at thechaicenter.com, or you can ask here. Once again, if you'd like to see a class, see this class again, previous class, a different course, it's thechaicenter.com /academy. Be well.